Okay, as Paul Grohl mentioned, I will be talking about the information design tool, specifically about the context and the tools that come with detecting and creating your own context in there. Before we really get into the tool, we have to, some of you I know are not universe designers. You're, you know, either web report designers, or you just work in the, you know, the ETL type of processing, things like that. You may never really touch the universe or really know what it's about. So first I need to really talk a little bit about what exactly context is, okay? So I'm just going to go over what is a context and how you use it in the IDT tool, and then how the IDT tool, the information design tool, detects the context, and you could create one yourself. Okay, so I'm going to go to the famous Google Maps. All right. While I was in college, I was about 19 and 20, and that's the time I knew everything. And I was, you know, it's anybody older than me now, they don't know anything. And I got a job as a armored truck driver, and my job was to drive a truck around and then sometimes go and put money in ATMs. And sometimes pull deposits. So when you go to Bank of America, put in the deposits, it was my job to take them out, put them in a bag, and take them into the main branches and where they'd be processed. So my first day on the job, they had me, I was driving, I lived at that time in San Dimas, and it was in downtown LA, the Loomis Fargo office. And my first day there, they basically gave me a list of places I needed to stop, and then to go and deliver money or pick up deposits or whatever needed to happen. And I looked over that list and I'm like saying, that's not right. It's like they had me zigzagging across the Southern California freeways, and it made no sense. It's like, well, I'm gonna have to double back. Later on, I determined that was kind of a safety mechanism in case somebody is following you. They don't like memorize your route and things like that. But at that time, again, I was, you know, I was smarter than everyone. I'm like, no, I'm going to do my own route. You know, I have a, you know, I'm going to start off here in downtown. I'm going to go down to 5. I'm going to have a, you know, couple of stops at Norwalk, then down to Orange County, then up to 405, going very slowly up to 405. Okay, a lot of people from LA or know of the LA traffic here, okay? And, you know, go stop at Hawthorne, Santa Monica, then up to Sherman Oaks, the Van Nuys area, et cetera, and then come back down to the office in LA, okay? That was basically the context I chose. And it made the most sense to me because it would, you know, I could do my route fast. I could save the company gas money by not having to zigzag and going back and forth across the LA County area, okay? And there was a reason to do that, because I had stops. I mean, yes, I could have, from my downtown office, taken the 10 all the way to Pomona, down to 71, down to 91, then across to the, I think this is the 91, yes, the 91, and then get to Norwalk that way. But that was going a whole different direction. Could I have done it? Yes, of course. But why? Wasted time. Wasted some gas, you know, etc. So not a good idea, okay? Unless, of course, I had a stop over here in the city of Corona, and no, they don't make beer there. It's just, I don't know what that name is from, but anyways. And now if I had a stop in Corona, then it would make sense for me to go ahead and use that path, okay? And we use context every day in our life, not just when we're delivering something. Even here, I live down here in Chandler near the 101 and the 202, and the office is up here near the 17 and the 101, okay? I use context every day. Every day I get up, I listen to the traffic reports. Where are the accidents, okay? So if I know there's an accident on the 17, northbound, I will take the 101 or sometimes the 51 up to get to the office. I will change my context depending upon what are the needs or what's happening, okay? That's kind of an analogy it's a close analogy in business objects context. It's Doesn't work precisely like that, but we could get some ideas of what a context being. Knowing that I use my brain to say, on my way home from work, I want to go to Costco. There's about 5 different Costcos, depending upon which path I go, okay? Now, if I didn't think about it, if I typed in, 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future, I typed in my car, I want to go to Costco. We're not supposed to have, we're not supposed to be driving cars anymore. In the 10 years from now, the cars will drive themselves. So I type in, I want to go to Costco. I'm hoping that the computer programmer, whoever programmed the automatic driver knew what they were doing, so it wouldn't stop at every Costco along the way. It would make sense to stop at the Costco that's nearest to my house or that has the closest path to my house. Okay? And some things like that, when you don't set up context, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to go around in loops. And you're going to go to every Costco when you just need to go to one. Okay? So again, that's in a moment, you're going to see why that's a little bit more, why I brought up that analogy of a loop. Okay? So basically, context is we want to get from somewhere to other, what's the best route, and take in consideration what do we need along the way. The definition of a context is really simple. It's basically a set of joins. It's nothing complex. The definition is easy. It's a set of joins. What's complex sometimes is to define the context. That can be complex depending upon how big your universe is, depending upon where your data is coming from, depending upon what kind of database. One person wants a database with this specific date, and the other person wants the same date, but from another database that's more reliable than the other database. So these could really get kind of complex in a way, okay? So really the context, set of joins, just like a phrase, real easy. I'm going to take the 10 to the 17 to get here. The hard part is utilizing it. What happens if there's an accident? What happens if there's construction or road closure, etc. Okay. Just a quick note, this is not to be confused necessarily with the Webby calculation context where a Webby designer will make their own variable and put into a calculation because they want to manipulate a block of data to, okay, so this is a little bit, the concept is kind of the same, but we're talking about context in the universe design or the universe tool, not the Webby reports, okay? So there's a context that people use in Webby, and that's not what I'm going to talk about today. If you're curious about this, just go ahead and ask for, for our next presentation that we talk about context in Webby, and I'm sure somebody will, you could always ask for that. Okay, context uses. First one is to resolve loops, okay? Loops in a universe. Now, these represent basically tables. You have your customer table, sales, reservations, reservation lines, invoice lines, and service. Now, loops in a universe design are basically very common, and they're different. For example, if this was just a pure database, most of the people working in a database are going to SQL Server or something and write a query. They're going to write a query for sales, and they're going to write a query for reservations. So there's no conflict there. However, the universe design tool is used for people, for Webby developers who don't necessarily know anything about SQL, who don't necessarily know how databases work, what's the difference between a relational database, okay, or a cube database, a lap database. That's what it was originally designed for. So we don't want to necessarily burden the Webby report developers with having to write their own SQL script. They just drop and drag their objects into the Webby the query panel, and they run their reports. Okay. So, however, here we see a loop, and we see the joins. Now, these little went ahead of myself. These little lines here represent. I guess I'm missing one right there. Imagine there's one right here as well. Okay. Represent joins. Okay. In your universe. Now, what happens here is we have this loop. Now, if we go back to my road analogy, my highway, if we're not sure what we're doing, we're going to keep going around and around. Now, here, what might happen is it's going to be the opposite of our Cartesian product. Cartesian product means you get multiple rows, duplicate data. Here, you may not get enough data, okay? And you may not know that until somebody brings up, hey, I know we have a lot more products than this. What's going on? And the web report designer might say, well, you got data. You have 30,000 rows. So you just don't know until somebody brings it up to you sometimes. So if you don't resolve a loop, you could have problems with the integrity of your data. You may not get as much as you really need or is really designed for. So here, for example, what might happen here is that it may, depending upon how you query this or how many objects you drop into your web report, it may think that you only want customers that have both sales and reservations. And so you may get a list of customers that have sales and reservations, where really, just because you made a sale does not necessarily mean they have a reservation already. Okay, that could be pending. So you could get some wrong data back. Okay, or maybe you just want customers that have the sales, or maybe you just want some reservations. All the customers have reservations. Okay. So basically, the tool, you resolve that by creating context. You have your sales context and you have your reservation context. That's why in the Webby tool, and we'll see this in a little bit rather than me keep showing you PowerPoints, you'll see a context button pop up depending upon what you pick. All right, for example, if I have a customer dimension and I have a sales dimension or a measure from this context, I'll the Webby, basically it knows that I want this context, the sales context. Now, however, if I want a customer and I want an object from this table and an object from service, and I don't pick any other objects from in the middle, Web Intelligence will say, wait a second, you want an object from customer and you do that again. Want an object from customer and you want an object from service. What should I do? And so some of you probably have experienced that when you have a context issue, a little button pops up that says, pick a context. And sometimes the context will make sense, sometimes they're A, B, C, D, and other times the context will say sales or reservations. And you say, oh, well, I wanted the reservation context, I picked that. You'll see that in just a moment in the tool. Okay, but and again, this is how, on at least in a design, how the tool, information design tool resolve context. You create your own context to solve the loop. So now we're not going in a circular motion anymore. We have one path depending upon which context you choose. Okay. There's another one that's a little bit more advanced. You can create your own context, and it doesn't have to necessarily have to solve a loop. As you can see right here, we have, and this is borrowing a little bit from the auditing universe. You have a table here, and we made a event details table, and we made a derived table of another event details that's hooked onto event details type table. Okay, so what we have here is if we have a object made from this table, and now we have an object called event ID. Well, look, we have two event IDs both connected to the same table. So what's going to happen? If you don't resolve this, there could be a number of things that may, you may get the wrong information. You may want to get the information from this table, whereas this table is connected to the event detail type. So what you're going to do is, to solve this, is you're going to create a context where context 1 is you go from this table to this table. Context 2 is the path goes from this table to the event details types to the event details type string. Okay, so you'll see that in a moment. We'll go ahead and I'll show you in the tool how you go about doing that. Okay, but again, you could go ahead and use context other than a loop. Help solve chasm traps. This might be an example, but a chasm trap is basically you have a dimension and you have like a measure and a measure, and depending upon what's happening, your query, your two measures, the measure from this table could be duplicated, and that's not what you want. Okay, so that's basically a real quick of what's a chasm trap, and you would use a context to solve that so it wouldn't happen. Okay, so you wouldn't get a duplicate of your measure. And I'm just going to go ahead and open up the tool. This is basically the new information design tool. The 3.1 tool has its own has its features as well, except it's a little bit different in how they approach this. And I'll show you what all these buttons do on the tool. Okay, we'll start with kind of easy universe, this kind of Motors Ed universe. Just to really quickly, again, they have our 3 different types of files in our universe. We have our connections, and we have our business layer. In a moment. There we go. We have our business layer, and then finally we have our data foundation. Okay, so it doesn't get any easier than this. I'm sure all of you guys have 4 table universes, right? Just, yeah. Sure, okay. All right. This is, again, not realistic, but just a demo of this tool. Okay. All right, so we could tell right now that we have a loop because for every table, we have to join these tables together. And so we had our joins, and we set our cardinality, our one-to-many relationship, or one-to-one relationship, et cetera, et cetera. And right here, you could really easily tell this is a loop because all the table joins form a loop. Okay? Sometimes when you have 100 tables, 200 tables, 300, 500 or more tables in your universe, sometimes finding a loop isn't as easy. Okay? So for here, what happens is in our data foundation, to the left we have a menu. Basically in this menu, a label-based menu, we have aliases and context. Okay. So in this aliases, I have a couple of features here that help me first find loops, and then also help me to detect contexts here. And then in a moment, I'll show you how to insert the context. Okay. So while I'm here, you have this little button. This is this up and down arrows. These are just basically properties from these tables. Okay. So if I go ahead and say, first off, I'll go ahead and visualize loops. I have basically an annual figures loop and an annual. So let me go ahead and first let me delete these. So I could show you from the start. Okay, so I deleted all my loops. Let me save this. Sorry, I delete all my context. So right now, if I go ahead and visualize loops, refresh, this loop is not resolved by any context. So now you see you have a problem there. You have a loop, and you have not resolved it by a context. Okay. This tool has an alias. I haven't talked about alias tables. It's kind of out of the scope of this, but normally you would use an alias table to solve a loop first, okay? And if we have time, I could cover some questions about that, but let me just stick to context to the moment. So I'm going to click on Detect Context. When I click on this Detect Context icon, basically it gives me recommendations of what the tool thinks the context should be. So if I click on the annual figures context and move it, you could now see the joins have a plus and minus sign on them. Okay, plus sign saying that this is the context of my annual figures. It's going to come from sales, move to annual figures, and go to model. And you also see some minus signs too. In other words, that context will completely exclude this quarter figures table and these joins. Okay, so if I click on my quarters figures, you're going to see the opposite happen. This context will include the sales, the quarters figures table, and the join to models, and exclude specifically the joins to the annual figure and from the annual figure table. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say, sure, I like them. If I want to, I could go ahead and call these something very meaningful. Okay, I could change. I don't have to stay with the default name. I could change these names if I wanted to, make them more meaningful, and click OK. So once I click OK, I now have my annual figures context and my quarter figure context. Okay, so the tool is pretty straightforward, pretty easy to use. Okay, now I just want to show you a universe that's a little bit bigger. Actually, let's do the financial sales. Okay. So again, more of a realistic universe. Okay, and this one already, whoops, has a context. And I have my fulfillment context and my orders context. In this case, it also has a Boolean example. So I have fulfillment and orders. Now, if I go ahead and bring back up this window that I just hid, that's basically the lists of contexts I have. And I could go ahead and click on this little this button in between the two arrows, so I could see both the two windows at one time. So now I could go ahead down here and see which joins are part of the context of the orders context and which are not. Now, you'll also, let's see. Basically what's happening, it's graying out the neutral tables. So as you can see up here in this window, I have fulfillments. I have basically, it's graying out both the neutral and also, in this case, the context, the tables that are not as part of the fulfillment context. Okay, and it's graying out the neutral tables. I don't see any neutral tables. There's also another, and I guess I could show you this way. Well, I want to go ahead and edit these. For example, maybe the IDT tool didn't do everything right. Maybe I find a join saying, wait a second, this is wrong. I want this to be part of the context. So I'm going to go up here. You see a little edit button on the top right. And see, if you notice right now, I'm clicking on these and nothing's happening. I'm not changing anything. So I go up here to the edit button. Now I could come down here and click and change these contexts. I could change this to neutral, and you could see the state now of this join is neutral. What that means is it's going to act as neutral. In other words, if I have my fulfillment context, I have a query that uses the fulfillment context, this table or this join will remain neutral, so it will be part of the query because it's not excluding it. Okay, that's basically what that means. And when I think I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and click that edit button so I don't accidentally edit things I don't want to. If anybody have used the 3.1 tool, you accidentally, click on something and then you say, oh shoot, I forgot. Did I have that on or off? Or, okay, so you get into some real trouble. Here you have the little edit button up on the top. Okay. So what does this mean for basically, one more thing I want to show you. If I go to my, I believe it was in my audit universe, let's see. Okay, yes, here is that example of the events details, and you have the derived table here made from this events details table. If I go to alias and context, I'm going to go ahead and visualize the loops. No loops detected, because you can see right here, this is not a loop, obviously, okay? However, if I come up here to detect context, it will now detect context. So I have my details and my ADS event details 2 context. Okay, so I could go ahead and use this tool to detect things that may need a context, but not necessarily in a loop. However, if I didn't want the tool to detect, if I figured out on my own that I think I need a context here, I could go up to here and I find a little icon that says insert context. So now I'm going to go ahead and name my context whatever. Again, give them some meaningful names. I'm just going to call this test 1. Okay. So in there, that's when I would, oops. Okay, here it is. Let me bring this up a little bit more. So now everything is defined as neutral. So this basically lets me create my own context, okay? So if I would come up back to here, I'm sorry about the screen resolution. So here's where I may want to create a context. And so here I turn that from neutral, click my edit button, and included in my context, okay? So then I'm just going to go ahead and insert another context called test2. Come back over here. Oh, got to click my edit button again. Include that join, and include that join in my context. So I have my test 1 and my test 2. And I could also go ahead and exclude if I wanted to find this join for my context and exclude that as well, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so you could make your own context as needed. You don't have to rely on the information design tool to do it for you. Okay. Let's see. Okay. How does this basically now, what does the Webby designer see once you do all this in the back end? Okay. So if I go to my financial sales business layer, it's a little bit smaller. If I go to actually, yeah, let me go to here first. Okay. If I go ahead and, I thought I had some saved queries, but obviously not. Okay. And I go to my business layer. Now, I want to just grab a couple of things. I just want to grab product group and maybe in, oh, we'll see what this works. I'm just going to go to measures. Now, I know, and I could show you this in a moment, that all these measures except for number of shipments come from one context. Number of shipments comes from a fulfillment context. Okay? So if I just grab my number of products, I refresh the query. Okay? Not a big deal. I view the script, and I just want you to notice just my script. I have select, product group, etc., sum, from, and group by. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. Now I'm going to grab number of shipments because I know that's from my fulfillment context. So now I'm bringing two things in from two different contexts. So if I go ahead and refresh that button, nothing happens, but now let's look at the SQL. Let's look at the script. You can now see, because it's grabbing from the two different contexts, it's without us really realizing it, it's basically putting an outer join to query 1 and to query 2. Okay, so that's how that deals with when you have objects from two different contexts, bring it together. Now, sometimes, depending on how you set this up, sometimes that could cause problems. Sometimes you want only people to only pick one context or another. Okay. So let me go ahead and cancel this. Now, what happens? And I'm going to grab all of these together. So let me actually close this. I want to go back to the data foundation for just a moment. So you see we have fulfillment context and we have the order context. Now remember, the query depends on what objects you have, these tables, you have your paths. Now what happens if you pick something from, say, this neutral table and pick something from a different neutral table, say a table, these should have a join, but say something over here. So what's going to happen? So Web Intelligence says, okay, you picked something that is not from one context or another. You picked a neutral table from one end and you picked another neutral table for another end. Now I have two different paths. Now I could go up to 17 or the 51. What should I do? Okay, so I'm going to go back here to my queries. And so I know that employee and customer come from neutral tables that are not part of any context, but you have to travel down one of those paths. Okay? So if I go ahead and try to run that query, I'll get that pop up. It'll say to me, so now I'm confused because you have two neutral tables and you don't have anything else in here that shows me, should I go through sales or fulfillment context? What should I do? So now you have to go ahead and pick one or the other, and I think you can modify this so you can do both, and then click on OK, and so you'll get the results back from the context. In this case, I forgot, but I picked fulfillment, something like that. Okay. So again, it just sort of depends on how people want to. I know some companies, they try not to confuse their web designers with, or try not to have web designers deal with context, so they'll adjust their universes accordingly. Okay, things like that. So again, this is just a really big overview of the context. Any specific questions or any questions anybody has? Did I encourage anyone to be universe designers? Did I scare anybody away?
How many people here have used the IDT? How many people here are universe designers? Apple reviews us.
Okay.
About half the room.
Right.
For the rest,
Right.
they probably like everything moving.
Right. Exactly.
Like your armored truck story.
Oh. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.